Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be looking at every single UFL team's best player they have yet to re-sign for the 2025 UFL season. Now, I've already done two videos in this kind of similar vein. We just had one last week on each team's quarterback room with just under 100 days before the season. And then a couple months ago, we did one on the best player that each team had re-signed to that point. Today, we're doing the best player they have yet to re-sign. Now, two caveats is that I'm going to be avoiding players that have retired, and I'm going to avoid players that are currently signed in the NFL or at least try to. Now, one other thing to know is that this video is being recorded on Christmas Eve. I am currently on vacation as this video is being posted. So if from then till now, I guess is the best way to put it, somebody ends up signing that was on this list, I'll put a pinned comment on who that was and who I would replace them with on this list. So without further ado, let's get started with the St. Louis Battlehawks, Willie Harvey Jr., linebacker. I know this might be a hot take. Hakeem Butler is yet to re-sign. I'm going to go with Willie. Now let me start by saying why I'm not going with Hakeem Butler. The biggest reason is that they still have two other players that they definitely could re-sign, that being Marcel Aitman and Darius Shepard. Now, neither of them are as good as Butler, obviously, but they're both still really solid players and would definitely ease the blow of losing Butler. Then, of course, Pearson has re-signed already. Getting Ja'Cour Pearson back is a big deal because he is on that level of Hakeem Butler. And they did sign two big free agents, Andy Isabella and Denzel Mims. So when you sign those guys, kind of ease it a bit. Linebacker-wise, a bit different. Willie Harvey Jr. was an all-UFL linebacker this past season, led the entire league in tackles, was fourth in solos, tied for second in TFLs, was top 20 in sacks, top 10 in sack yardage, was even tied for sixth in passes defended, and was one of just 9 players that recorded 2 forced fumbles. Pretty hard to argue that. Look, him not being on this roster is going to be a huge blow for the defense. Whereas the offense, we already don't know what it's going to be. They completely are overhauling their quarterback room aside from Manny Wilkins. So, Hakeem Butler not being there, we'll see exactly how much of an impact that has. Whereas the defense, we know without Willie, this defense is going to take a massive step back. This is somebody who was a field general for the team. Obviously, when you look at what he did this past year, when you have 4 sacks, and you're not even top 10 in that, but you're top 10 in sack yardage, your sacks meant something. When you're one of 2 guys with forced fumbles, that multiple of them, that's a big deal. He was someone who could do pretty much everything. The only stat he didn't do anything on was interceptions. So, you got to give him credit there. Willie Harvey definitely is the best player this team hasn't re-signed in a need to re-sign sort of way, which is kind of how this is who they need to re-sign. I know some would say the best overall player is Hakeem Butler, but for this team, they need Willie Harvey back more. That's why I'm putting him here for the Battlehawks. Now, the Renegades, I'm going to go with Luis Perez, quarterback. This is obvious. Look, passing-wise, he was the best passer in the league by a country mile. First in pretty much like every good stat. Second in completion percentage, first in passer rating. Fumbles, he didn't fumble a ton, only 2 fumbles, which did put him tied for 4th in fumbles lost. But he was also tied for 6th in yards per attempt because he wasn't a check down guy. Tied 4th in interceptions is actually insanely good when you consider he's the only quarterback that had 200 completions and 300 passing attempts. This was obvious, Perez. Now, look, of all these quarterbacks, he's the most likely to re-sign or even come back to the league in general, right? McCarron recently said something that he's, leaning towards retirement. Te'amu and Cookus are both just complete, who knows what's going to happen. Perez, everybody pretty much expects him to re-sign. In fact, if somebody re-signs with the team from when I'm recording this to when it gets uploaded, it's probably going to be him. So this was the easiest one. Perez easily gets the spot for the Renegades. Now, the San Antonio Brahmas, I'm going to go with linebacker Wyatt Ray. This one was basically between him and Anthony McFarland Jr., and I ended up going with Ray. Now, Ray was tied for 6th in sacks and 5th in sack yards, tied for 8th in TFLs. He was just a pass rusher, but he was a very solid pass rusher. He was not an elite pass rusher, which we'll see an elite one literally the next one, but he was just under that as a great pass rusher. Putting him above McFarland for mainly 2 reasons. Number 1, Wade Phillips is your head coach. Again, more than likely, every single coach is coming back that we know now. Obviously, DeFilippo's not because of Wisenhunt, blah, blah, blah. Wade Phillips is your head coach. Defense matters more than offense then. So Wyatt Ray beats him out there. Number 2, John Lovett is back for the Brahmas. He was competing with Martinez for a lot of the year on being that on rushing crown leader. Ended up going to Martinez, but he's still up there. I think that overall, while not having McFarland will suck because he did a lot in the very limited time he was there, I think Wyatt Ray overall is a better player in terms of what they need, especially because he only played 9 games as well. He missed 1 game. If you add in a 10th game, he maybe hits 6 sacks, 7 TFLs, which just increases his stats even more. So, going with Wyatt Ray for the Brahmas. Not a ton more to say. Next to the DC Defenders, Malik Fisher. Now, this is an elite pass rusher. He easily could have been an all UFL defensive end if it wasn't for Chris Odom, who did get it. Again, you can even argue that Fisher deserved it more than him. He was tied for second in sacks, tied for second in sack yards, and tied for fourth in TFLs. He also did have a forced fumble and a fumble recovery, as well as having 33 total tackles, which included 17 solo. Very, very good stats. 3 passes defended. Again, somebody who did pretty much everything except interceptions. If you don't have him, this defense is even worse than they already were last year. Look, DC wasn't even a good defense last year, and if you take away Fisher, oh my God, you're just making a bad unit terrible. Whereas Te'amu, who is the other big signing they haven't had, I don't think it's as big a deal. Now, look, I did say in the quarterback room video that, they need him back in a sense that their quarterbacks are very questionable. I still stand by it. But I also said in that video that Abram Smith, if he's back 70% of what he was in 2023, you don't really need a great quarterback. You just need quarterbacks that aren't ass. So because of that, Malik Fisher gets this spot. It's just that this is a guy who was a very elite and underappreciated pass rusher. He had like that one great game where he had like 3 sacks or something. And overall, he's just somebody who can do a lot for your team. And when you have somebody like this, an elite pass rusher, it always helps everybody around them. So if this defense can even improve a little bit, talent-wise and overall scheme-wise and the rest of it, and you bring back Fisher, you have a pretty good unit. Now, moving on to the USFL side, we're going to start off with the Memphis Showboats on Vinny Papale. Now, this one was between him, Sage, and Cookus. So let's just get Sage out of the way. When you compare him to Sage, the biggest difference between them is that Vinny had better yards after catch and better touchdowns, as well as more yards. They were like 19th and 20th in receiving yards, but Vinny ended up beating him in both those other stats. In a lot of ways, he kind of like out tight end the tight end. He never had a reception of over 30 yards. In fact, he didn't even have one of over 25 yards, yet ended up still being top 20 in receiving yards. Because he was 11th in yards after catch, tied for 7th in receptions, and tied 2nd in receiving touchdowns. He was one of the few guys that ended up having 5 touchdowns, which does say a lot, especially considering Sage had like only 2. So when you look at that, Vinny had a knack for getting in the end zone and having those clutch moments that you remember, whereas Sage, not as much. So even though Sage coming back would be a huge boost for this team's offense, I'm going with Vinny, especially because he helps out quarterbacks a lot with that, poor pass defense. And that goes to the next one with Case Cookus. The biggest reason is because Wisenhunt is the new head coach. He brought in his quarterback that he traded for, Quentin Dormady, and they re-signed T-Will already. It's one of those things where it's a question of, do they want Cookus back? Don't know for sure. Because of that, going with Vinny. Now, next is going to be the Houston Roughnecks with Chris Odom, defensive end. The easiest one. I'm just going to say, this was the single easiest one to pick in the entire 8 teams. Why? When they made the GM change, they cut player after player after player after player. As of now, on Thorne's spreadsheet, again, Thorne from PFN, he has the most updated UFL roster page. 2 players are currently on the roster that have not re-signed. He's one of them. That says a lot. That says that this new group or the new GM wants him on the team. There's a reason for it. He was an all-UFL player. It was debatable. He should have gotten it over Fisher. He did. Tied for 4th in TFLs with 8. Again, one of those 9 players with 2 forced fumbles. Tied 6th in sacks, 13th sack yards. Most importantly, this pass rush was unbelievably disappointing. The Houston Roughnecks should have had the best pass rush by a country mile, and it was one of the worst. Then there was Chris Odom. He came off a big injury, and he ended up being the best pass rusher on the entire team. Really not much to say. It's obviously Odom. He gets the spot. Again, this is the easiest one to pick from. Next is the Michigan Panthers with the biggest hot take, and I'm going with Frank Ginda. Was he the best player for them this past season who was not re-signed? No. Marcus Sims and Breland Speaks are both better than him. But the one thing that Ginda has above both of them is that he is the Michigan Panther. When you say who is the best Michigan Panther of all time, when you're talking about 2022 to now Michigan Panthers, it's Ginda without even thinking about it. He was insanely underappreciated and underrated in 2022, and then in 2023, he got his flowers, had an even better year. He had over 100 tackles, easily got that DPOY that year. And this past year was still not on pace to have that dominant of a year, but still on pace to have a really solid year, over 50 tackles, probably going to end up with like 5 or 6 TFLs, going to have almost 40 solo tackles, which would have put him very high on a lot of those lists. So, still was on pace to have a very good all UFL level season, if not a DPOY season. And then he got hurt. So, while he isn't the best player in performance this past year, when you're talking about who they want to re-sign, again, this is where it comes into who they need to re-sign more so than the best overall player. Ginn is who you need to re-sign. So because of that, I'm putting him on here over Sims and Speaks. Though I do get why you would put either of them on here, mainly Speaks, but going Ginn. And then last is the Birmingham Stallions. I'm putting Jay Sternberger, tight end. Didn't put Corral on here, didn't even really think about it because of the fact that, number one, you have two other quarterbacks who, if they end up getting released in Magoo and Martinez, could end up returning. Number two, you also have Sam Hartman flying around. And, I mean, the team signed two guys in Martinez and Corral right in the offseason. They could do something similar again. Whereas tight end, Jace is a back-to-back all-league player. Now, both of them were debatable because of the fact that he wasn't a reception guy. He was a yards guy, right? 25 receptions for 454 yards is insane. That was good enough for second in the entire league in yards per reception, whereas he was tied 22nd in overall receptions. He was tied 6th in receiving touchdowns with 4, 10th in yards after catch, 6th in yards. The number one receiver on this team in yards, even beating out Deion Kane, who also hasn't re-signed yet, but giving it to Jace. Again, I think that overall he's more important to bring back than just Corral, whereas Corral would be a huge thing. Again, there's a lot of other guys you could replace him with, whereas with Jace, there's not really that many guys you could easily replace somebody who's been this dominant at this level. Again, we're talking about back-to-back seasons where he's been, you could very easily argue, the best tight end in all of spring football. Again, I say arguably because it depends what you like in a tight end, right? I was somebody who was campaigning for Sage to win all UFL or all USFL tight end in 2023, and Sal this year for the same reasons of I like the tight ends that are going to get me my receptions when I need them, not necessarily yards. But there is no denying what Jace is, and that is a very, very scary tight end to have. You need to legit guard him. You can't just, let him get those short gains because he's not going to get a short gain. He's going to burn you for like 25 to 30. So when you have somebody that scary at tight end, it says a lot. So because of that, I'm putting Jace as the player that the Stallions need to re-sign the most. So that'll do it. This has been Tom Fox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. We're less than 100 subscribers away from 1,000, where we are doing a giveaway at 1,000 subscribers. Again, make sure you have the bell turned on as we are getting closer and closer to the UFL season kicking off. Again, I will be away when the first half of the schedule releases, but the second half releases the day I get back. Depending on how tired I am and all that, I will upload the schedule video either on the 31st or the 1st of January, as well as shorts of each team schedule and all that. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while, think about becoming a community member for 99 cents a month. You get an exclusive monthly video, exclusive team emojis, and posts. And as always, guys, have a great night.